All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 181. This is our opportunity to talk to you about whatever you'd like to discuss in college football, as well as the topics of the day. So many things going on. Before we kind of fire this up, I just wanted to say just a couple of quick comments about some nice things happening on our CFP. Number one, we had our holiday drive, which it's obviously February now, but because we created a 501c3, it takes a bit of a delay to actually get the money that were donated. So it was really nice at the beginning of this week. We donated $18,000 that was raised by people on our CFB. And we gave half of it to Toys for Tots, so $9,000 to the Marines Toys for Tots and $9,000 to four children's hospitals. So that was also kind of nice because usually we give it to the top three, like in a way to incentivize people. You know, if you're a fan of a school, you just say, your team name is attached to your donation, and we give it to the three children's hospitals associated with the three biggest fan bases. So this year we had a tie for third. So instead of like coming up with a tiebreaker, we just split it because there was so much money to go around. So we gave $4,500 to Children's Hospital in upstate New York that is closest to Army West Point. That was the tricky one. They don't have a children's hospital on the West Point campus. So actually called West Point and they got back to me and they were really good about that. So we gave it to the Children's Hospital associated with them. Tulane Green Wave, we gave $2,700 to the Children's Hospital of New Orleans. Notre Dame, we gave $900 to Beacons Children's Hospital in South Bend. And for South Dakota State, we gave $900 to the Sanford Children's Hospital in Sioux Falls. So I just wanted to really quickly go over that because it's a big part of what we do in the winter months. And to give that money again, our 9th annual holiday drive, it's great to do that. And we love to support people and support children at RCFB. And hey, another interesting kind of milestone before I forget, we hit 3 million subscribers on RCFB. That's amazing because literally at the beginning of the season, we hit 2 million. So that was kind of an interesting exponential growth. We think Reddit for a little while there was making us a suggested subscription for people who are joining Reddit. Like, hey, you like college football? Try RCFB. So we seem to have benefited by that by a million, which is kind of interesting. So how many of those people post? I don't know. I don't care. I don't get a share of it. So honestly, I have no idea how many of those people show up. But all of that said, lots of things going on in college football. I mean, there's just been so many things shifting over. I see if you'd like to join the conversation, hit request on the Twitter app. But I see, John, you've hit request. I'll let you up here. Some other topics, obviously the coaching shifts. I mean, we had just sort of it's amazing how many things happened after we had our last conversation because Boston College obviously hired Bill O'Brien. That was to be expected. But the real kind of record skip freeze frame moment was Chip Kelly leaving UCLA to take Bill O'Brien's place at Ohio State for however short of a tenure he had as our offensive coordinator. I don't think that's necessary. I mean, okay, I have to be honest here. Some of you may know I'm a USC alumnus, so there was some joking around in kind of our sort of, Twitter, or I should say our chat group that, hey, oh my gosh, what happened to UCLA? That's gotta bite. But at the same time, Chip Kelly, by all accounts, is kind of an interesting guy. He didn't really care that much about what he was. I mean, he didn't really have a passion for what he was doing, and the idea of staying until he got fired wasn't something he wanted. Kept putting his name into every hat that was available, and the hats would give it back to him. So he and Ryan Day go back. Ryan Day played for Chip Kelly at New Hampshire, so I think there's something to be said about the connection between the two. Ryan Day stepping back from being his own play caller, and clearly he must trust Chip Kelly a lot. And Kelly's made a ton of money in his lifetime, and I think he doesn't mind that he's going to take a pay cut for that. And then UCLA decided to promote their running backs coach, who was a former running back great, Deshaun Foster. Like, again, I'm old enough to remember when Deshaun Foster and I are actually about the same age. I was remembering when he was playing for UCLA. The end of his career was so stupid. I mean, it wasn't somewhat his fault, but not really, because it was the stupid NCAA rules. He missed the final couple of games for UCLA because he drove a borrowed Ford Expedition that belonged to an actor who was on the TV show St. Elsewhere back in the day. Like, he wasn't even going on, I think, at the time. But because of that, somehow he got ratted out by, I can't remember who it was. It was all like really weird. It has nothing to do. Oddly enough, I don't think USC fans were brought into this. It ended up being like some tiff in the family of the person who donated, who loaned him the car. And yeah, he ended up having to miss his final couple of games. And again, that's how weird it's so weird to think where we are now compared to where things were when that happened around 2001. But here he is, the new head coach of UCLA. So I know there's some controversy over, taking a coordinator and putting him all the way up to head coach, but UCLA kind of arrived in this in a really awkward time. February is not when you're looking for a new head coach. Typically, a lot of the potential candidates were already off the table. I'd be curious to know, and I haven't seen reporting on this yet, what the buyout is like for Deshaun Foster. Obviously, the players like him a lot, but it reminds me a little bit of, I mean, have they structured this like Mississippi State did with Zach Arnett, where again, Mike Leach dies unexpectedly? And really, I mean, first of all, it's a tragedy, but also an awkward time for them to hire a new coach. So they took Zach Arnett, gave him a contract with a very low buyout. So if it didn't work out, they could kind of pull the cord. And they did this season, and then were able to kind of enter the normal hiring cycle, and obviously they were able to get the guy from oh my gosh, the name just slipped my head, the offensive coordinator from Oklahoma. So again, that's I wonder if UCLA's done something like that. So if this doesn't quite pan out midway through the season, they can maybe jump in and get their name in front of the coaching carousel. But we'll see. Those are some of the bigger stories going on right now. But John, what's on your mind?
Hey man, how you doing? Sorry, I missed the last couple of minutes. For some reason, everything was dead silent on my end, so I think I only caught half of what you were talking about.
Well, hopefully it was. We'll see. It's always fun for me to then go back and see what recorded or not, but hopefully that went through. But what's on your mind, man?
Oh well, yeah, we're just talking. You're just talking about coaches, man. When are we officially gonna have the coaching portal? We have the transfer portal. Can we just get a coaching portal at this point? Because it feels like we can't have these. It seems like a lot of coaches are not really full committal these days on some of their jobs, which for all the criticism on players, is quite wrong to see coaches, flip flopping as much as players do these days. But another point I just want to make too. I just want to give a quick shout out to the college football innovator, that's Connor Stallions, forever improving the game until the end of time. A real visionary that we didn't know we had until it was too late.
Yeah, because I know one of the joke. I didn't. I'm gonna admit I didn't make that joke on our CFB, but I saw it. But the helmet communication in college football seems to be coming near after, because for those who may not be aware, there was a trial run during the bowls. The teams, I guess, had to opt in. Both of them had to agree to it to test different ways of helmet communication, something that obviously the NFL's had for a long time, but college has not had it, mostly because of the competitive issues of cost, and not every team might be able to afford all of those helmets. But after the Connor Stallions thing, it certainly pushed it to the forefront, and it appears to be and I've read the articles that the NCAA Football Rules Committee, excuse me, which is scheduled to meet at the end of this month, could come out of the meeting with proposals to allow that in tech. I'm not sure if it's going to be everyone can adopt it, but they may allow people to, usually it's both sides have to agree. It could only be used potentially in conference games if not every conference can do that. But yeah, it certainly seems to be something that got pushed to the forefront after, this is so stupid. Why do we still have all these sheets and all these things on the sideline? And a guy like Connor Stallions uh, can could just put themselves. And then it became kind of, because the other thing that came out, I remember early on when that controversy started to erupt, was the whole reason that rule even existed was, again, competitive balance. While a school like any of the top P5 schools can afford to send scouts to all of these games, it was actually to prevent unfair advantages for those well-funded schools versus, say, and I hate to always pick on them, but Akron, because they're always kind of a classic example of a school that seems to always be financially tight for money, or ULM, and it was hard for them to do it. So they said, all right, well, if just for the sake of competitive balance, no one can do it. But now, that if that pushes helmet communication, I think it'll be better. It'll be probably better for the whole game. I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. I hope it works out. We'll see. I'm always a little bit like, we'll see. But yeah, I love that. That's a great reference to that, man. Oh, by the way, one other coach I should mention too. I mean, Ryan Grubb, he had almost as short of a tenure, probably a little longer of a tenure at Alabama than Bill O'Brien did at Ohio State. But of course, he's now going to the Seahawks. I don't know. Was it Tuscaloosa? I doubt that. That was kind of, people were joking because, like, of course, last year in the offseason, he turned down an overture by Nick Saban to join the staff as the offensive coordinator. But I do think that perhaps, he just, A lot of people were expecting him to be hired as potentially one of at least one of the candidates to replace Kalen DeBoer as the head coach of Washington. His name was in the pool a lot during the height of the coaching carousel. But I think maybe that's it. Maybe he just wants to go and hop up to the NFL. It's an interesting decision. Maybe it explains a little bit about why he didn't take some of those head coaching jobs that were maybe thrown his way in FBS. But yeah, we'll see where that goes, and it'll be interesting to see who Alabama replaces him with. I don't think they have yet. I think that's only been officially stated that he's now joined the Seahawks. One other topic I also wanted to mention is this one came up today. The Pac-12 has begun the formal process to move on from Commissioner George Kliavkoff to formally let him go. One of the jokes I read was, who's getting the kids or who gets to visit? Does he get the kids on the weekend? And who are the kids? Does that mean it's Ohio? Pardon me. Does that mean it's Oregon State and Washington State? Basically, this is, of course, for those who have been keeping up with what the kind of the interesting drama towards the end of the Pac-12. Oregon State and Washington State are technically the only two now allowed to make these kinds of decisions after a court rule that they could box out the other 10, so long as they don't do something that makes it unfair to those other 10 that are departing. So they were the ones that informed the other 10 schools that they've started that process. Kliavkoff is interesting. As much as he gets a lot of heat, a lot of this is just inheriting a really bad hand from Larry Scott. He could have done better. Certainly, he could have done better with the Pac-12. But there were some other kind of interesting things. He's a commissioner, and I always caution with a guy like a commissioner, including the president of the NCAA or even their pro equivalents. They are basically acting as the face of all the presidents or the owners if it's a pro team. But the Pac-12 presidents were the ones that kind of put Kliavkoff in a bad position because and I think some people was it Arizona State under the bus for this? Their president came up with this really crazy high number of the media deal they were expecting to get. This is, of course, after USC and UCLA had announced they were bolting. And their desire for a high amount of money kind of, I think, handcuffed Kliavkoff a little bit to the point where the Big 12 is able to get a better TV deal and take that deal before the Pac-12 even got a chance to really get an offer, which kind of backed them into trying to make a offer out of an Apple TV deal, which just obviously set everybody else to leave. So part of it was the president's, part of it was him. I don't think we're entirely done with the eventual analysis of what happened to the Pac-12 and why it failed the way it did. I'm kind of looking forward to it. But certainly this is an expected move. I think a lot of people were just frankly surprised Kliavkoff hadn't been booted earlier. But yeah, he is now officially going to be on his way out. It would be really funny if he tried to sue them in the process. I don't know what basis he would, but that would just be the perfect ending to the Pac-12, like just lawsuit after lawsuit and angry people. Another kind of interesting thing also connected with the Pac-12, and this is coming from Brett McMurphy. He had a couple of interesting kind of notes today. One of which is and this is something that came up actually at the end of the last offseason, because the disintegration of the Pac-12 brought into a whole big question who's going to be responsible for all these bowl tie-ins. Because obviously, while the joke would be, the Beavers and the Cougs will play them all, there is an issue because you have all these bowl tie-ins who are now suddenly told, like, oh, by the way, next season you're only going to have two Pac-12 teams to choose from. So the agreement that apparently, at least for now, is if Pac-12 teams do not make, or I should say the 10 former Pac-12 teams do not make the CFB playoff, they will probably still end up in the Pac-12 affiliated bowls for just the next 2 seasons, not the bowls that are associated with the Big 10, the Big 12, and of course the ACC, which still is hilarious to think of Cal and Stanford heading over there. So that means the Alamo, Las Vegas, Holiday Sun, LA Bowl, and Independence Bowl will probably be tied into teams who were in the Pac-12 as well as the Pac-2 who don't make the playoffs. So that is probably something they all had to kind of agree to keep out of the lawsuit over leaving those bowls high and dry before they have a chance to even negotiate anything. Hey, John, I see your hand up. And if you'd like, anyone else wants to join the conversation, feel free to hit request.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned the Pac-12 and the layers, the craziness that is this all coast conference. What is the possibility? I would say I know not high. I just want a percentage chance from you. What's the possibility 5, 10 years down the road that we have this hypothetical trade that was talked about on Twitter this past week, where these West Coast teams are just sent over to the Big 12, and the ACC gets West Virginia, Cincinnati, etc. What you think? 0 out of 100%. What's the possibility of you think of that actually happening in the next 10 years?
Well, I think it's low, but it really, I mean, the bottom line is money, right? So if they're just not making enough money, if they realize that these teams are because I mean, the problem is those middle teams. Because I mean, it makes sense with let's say Cal and Stanford. They're the ones that are really in the bind, having to cross the country for all of their other conference games. But the Big 12 teams are pretty cogent. West Virginia is a little odd, granted, but I mean, but they're not that far away. And UCF's a little far, but nothing's like Hawaii far. Or something like UCLA flying to Rutgers. Although again, they're getting a bigger cut of the pie. So the problem with that is the trade, because the teams that might be closest to the ACC may not want to leave for the ACC because they're already also close to the other Big 12 teams. So the issue there is just trying to figure out how to find which two teams in the Big 12 would want to then join the ACC. Maybe there are two teams. I'm not sure. But at this point, they're so close in terms of probably their benefits. I'm not sure there's a real desire to shuffle. Of course, that could lower I mean, because, let's face it, if they do that kind of a change, you're still going to end up with some teams that are in the far eastern part of the Big 12 that are going to be stuck playing Cal and Stanford, which is also going to be a distance for them too. I mean, let's say UCF ends up staying in the Big 12, they'd still have to fly so far to get those two teams that are way out west. But it's an interesting question. That kind of one of the jokes, and I'm curious if this is where it's going to go. The CFP, I think they still have to vote unanimously to come up with certain agreements, and with things not entirely settled, that means the Pac-2 still has a vote. And some people are saying, like, are they going to try? Because it sounds like they're playing some negotiation games to make sure they get a full share of their amount of money, and they're even making requests that are a little bit absurd. They're asking for a share of the money going past 2025. That's a problem because if those of you who may know, the playoff is currently only set for two more seasons. Like they haven't finalized anything beyond the 2025/26 season. So the next two seasons are literally the only things that we have for certain in terms of a college football playoff. And that, by the way, is ominous because of the strategic alliance between the SEC and Big Ten. There's an outside possibility, which may become closer, that they could potentially come up with their solution for what would come up in 2026 and onward. Probably participating with the other conferences, but on terms that they would rather have. We'll see. But one of the jokes that came out of it was, would the SEC and Big Ten just finally demand that the Big Ten and ACC simply split Wazoo and Oregon State, and just one of you take one of you take the other, and otherwise you're never going to participate in our new playoff in 2026. That's been joked about, but at the same time, that is that is the ultimate play of the Pac-2. They've pretty much been clear that their dream goal is to make it into one of these, the P4. But whether that happens or not, of course, will remain to be seen. Kind of a follow-up, I wanted to do the second part of what McMurphy had mentioned. With the Pac-12's unique bowl tie-in situation, the Alamo Bowl organizers have said they still want to be able to select former Big 12 programs, Oklahoma and Texas, as its Big 12 representative for the next two seasons. That is opposed by both the SEC and the Big 12. So that's kind of the awkwardness, because again, that's the Alamo Bowl was a Pac-12, Big 12 tie-in, and I think the Alamo Bowl is trying to negotiate a way to still keep Oklahoma and Texas as options for the next two seasons. But the Big 12, for obvious reasons, is not happy with the idea of having those two guys back in after they're the ones that obviously had ditched the Texan, or however you want to say it, out, however you want to write it out. But again, and the SEC obviously isn't going to probably let go of two of their now top programs in terms of eyeballs to go play in a Big 12 matchup. I see another hand up. Let's see here. College Football Lounge. We'll let you up here as well. So yeah, College Football Lounge, what's up?
Hey, how's it going? As somebody who went to Oklahoma, I want no part of the Alamo Bowl again. I don't want to top our six turnover performance. But I wanted to touch on the Pac-12 and just say it's a shame to me that Oregon State, Washington State, that they were the ones that get left out in the cold because you look at some of the mismanagement, both administratively and financially, at some of these Pac 12 universities. And I mean, it's just staggering. I mean, Cal, absolutely massive debt from the stadium renovation. Arizona, obviously, is not in a good situation, financial mismanagement there. You had Arizona State with the whole Ray Anderson, Herm Edwards, quote unquote, new leadership model thing. UCLA, the Chip Kelly situation, from my understanding, it would have cost them $8 million to fire him, and they either couldn't afford it or didn't want to pay that, so they just waited until he found another job somewhere else, and then just promoted their running backs coach. Which that's one of those things that maybe it works out, but you look at the guy's resume, and to just be in a position where you just have to promote him because you couldn't afford an $8 million buyout doesn't seem optimal. So it's just, it just seemed like it was just a kind of a comedy of errors from a number of schools in that league, administratively. And Washington State and Oregon State, frankly, were not. I mean, those were pretty well run athletic departments. I mean, given the financial resources they had, it seems like they were performing sort of above the standard of what they could reasonably be expected to perform. So, personally, I hope they do find a landing spot somewhere in the future, in the near future, to where they're not in a situation where they're having to slash their budgets.
I agree with you, by the way, on the fact that they're both two programs that were run well. With they were always in a difficult spot, which is unfortunately part of the reason why they were left behind. But yeah, um, they weren't mismanaged by any stretch of the imagination. They were doing a lot with a little. In fact, you just look at how they're. I mean, the Wazoo AD ended up at Michigan because he was good at what he did. Michigan didn't hire him because he was a bad AD. So yeah, I agree with you, and it's an absolute shame because before Arizona sort of stole the limelight with that 240 million dollar miscalculation. I think they said it was actually lower than that, it being only 100 and something $1 million miscalculation in their school budget. UCLA was kind of the school that was, for reasons that maybe partial, both the UC schools were kind of in, Cal being the other one, were partially in sort of self-inflicted financial distress because UCLA has actually exceptional football facilities now. They were actually infamous for being kind of comically bad. The on-campus practice field at UCLA up until 2017 was only 80 yards long. They didn't have enough room for it, so they redid everything and kind of built modern facilities at UCLA. But I have a feeling that and some other decisions had contributed to a debt that they weren't being able to pay off very well in the Pac-12 deal, and that's what led them to the Big Ten. So that goes to why, and I also know with the Chip Kelly thing, UCLA, while they're kind of infamous for not packing their stadium, they do have some extremely rich boosters, but they have their own ability to push back against Jarman, the athletic director. So I know there was some resistance to firing Chip Kelly from some of the key people that they need to keep happy if they're ever going to kind of, rise up and pay NIL and all of those things. And that's the thing. I mean, they are not a bad. I mean, UCLA is like the classic. Oh, they're a sleeping giant. Maybe one day they'll rise up, and they certainly could. And they've had great seasons before, but it's not like they can't recruit. They had an incredible quarterback on paper that, as a true freshman, unfortunately got injured, and now he's at Oregon. But so they can do those things. But I think, yeah, Chip Kelly just did not want to. He just seemed tired of it too. So it was like a perfect departure. You actually had a quirky enough coach to say, you know what, I probably have a ton of money in my pocket right now. He's got his house in New Hampshire. He's happy to go there, relax. And now I'll just take millions of dollars to go coach and do the X's and O's stuff I really enjoy while coaching with somebody who seems to trust me, and I trust him because he was my player. And when I was, because obviously, as I mentioned before, Ryan Day played for Chip Kelly at New Hampshire, so there's that connection too. But I like your points. They're all very salient on that stuff. I mean, USC, Oregon, and Washington seem to be the schools that had the most clear plan of what to do. Like USC clearly wanted out for whatever reason. I don't know if it's ever been entirely clear. I think there was a decision to pair them up with UCLA, and UCLA, for all its problems, I've said this before, no school in America other than like Harvard and Yale has an international market value like UCLA. I didn't believe it until I started traveling a lot more. Like I remember, gosh, 2005, I traveled to China and there was a UCLA store in a mall in Shanghai. Like, and it was an officially licensed UCLA store. I went to, Europe, and you go to H&M, which is like obviously you've seen them here, but they're a European brand, and like they'll sell like shirts with American logos on it, like the Rolling Stones lips or something like that, except they'll also inexplicably have a Harvard logo, a Yale logo, and a UCLA logo. So that value, I kind of get it. It's not like saying you're getting there's something there to it. But yeah, no, they are though terrible. And as people keep forgetting, they still have to now start paying. They haven't figured out the amount yet. They have to figure it out, but they have to pay the calimony. The UC system said UCLA has to pay Cal a yearly, divorce, alimony, way you want to say it, after they join the Big Ten, although they have yet to set the amount. So I cannot wait to hear how much that is. That is actually going to add a little bit of salt to that particular relationship. It already did before, but they still haven't put a number on it. And because they're a public university, they're going to have to eventually announce that. John, your hand's up.
Yeah, hey, would you mind just going a little more in depth about the Arizona situation? And do we think that's a sole event, or that is something that could be possibly happening in other schools? Because I mean, college debt isn't new with the athletics programs, but I
Well,
think
it wasn't athletics. To be clear, this wasn't
okay.
athletics. This was the entire university somehow thought it had $240 million it never had. Like that is, and again, they've rolled it down a little bit, but it's still an insane amount of money that somehow the university thought they had, so they planned their budget based on it. The entire university did. So because it's such an incredible amount of money, excuse me, they're not only going after like they have to go after the potential cuts for student scholarships, instructor salaries, but they may even have to go after sports too. So football, okay, let's face it, football is safe. Men's basketball, Arizona is absolutely safe. Probably women's basketball as well, but it's like, this is going to potentially tighten some things for non-revenue sports. I know I was listening the Athletics podcast. I actually listened to it today. They had an interview with Jed Fish over at obviously he's at Washington now, and he wasn't being too direct about some of the reasons he was leaving, because he was being diplomatic about it. But one of the things he said was basically, at Washington I can get a budget for a support staff I was never going to be able to get at Arizona. And the reason that was understood is because of all this stuff that was going on. I saw both of you guys unmute. College Football Lounge, I saw you unmute first, and then we can go to John.
Yeah, since we're talking about Arizona and fish, I just wanted to jump in real quick. And do you think there's any truth to this? And this became kind of contentious between Arizona media and, some media elsewhere. Is reported that Fish had interviewed for the UCLA job. Do you think there's any truth to that at all, or do you think it was
Boy,
just
I love that you brought that one up, because I was debating about bringing it up as a topic. It certainly seems that he's vehemently denying it. I don't know. The argument that I think is the most believable is if UCLA, depending on how you look at it, the fact that UCLA went with Deshaun Foster seems like they just knew they weren't going to be able to get anyone else. It just felt that way, because Jed Fish would have had a buyout at Washington that would have been fairly significant, and UCLA did not appear to be interested in trying to overspend in anything given their financial situation, at least not until they have some more of that Big Ten money coming in, at any of that Big Ten money coming in. So I don't know. I'm leaning on the fact that might have been a smoke like kind of rumor that maybe someone was throwing out there or misinterpreted. only because I think again, if based on what we know about, as you mentioned, UCLA wasn't willing to buy out Chip Kelly, and they were just kind of happy to have him leave on his own accord, which he did because again, they were lucky he's quirky enough like that. Um, and I think it makes sense because again, I'm very curious to see the contract that they gave to Sean Foster when they get the details, the buyout on that. I'm hoping it's really low because they're kind of testing out to see if the running back coach can suddenly be the head coach. I mean, because again, players can love him. I mean, I've seen the video. The players are thrilled. He's a nice guy. That's awesome, but that doesn't always translate into being a head coach. They've seen plenty of those over the years. So I wonder, and because of those factors, you kind of look at why would they have kicked the? I mean, maybe they kicked the tires. Maybe they talked to their agent. What's his buyout? And they heard it and like, okay, we'll have to come back to you later on that one, Haas. But I'm guessing if there was, it was very initial. But I would be shocked if it was an interview. That said, if this had opened up in, let's say, December, I would not have been surprised if they made a move at Jedd Fisch because that I think is what's feeding it. Because everyone thought if Chip Kelly left, Jedd Fisch was going to be one of the targets. But I just think that Jedd Fisch at Washington made him unobtainable for UCLA, and I'd be shocked if it went particularly far on that. But we'll see. I mean, I've seen both. I mean, obviously, there's been notable people kind of shooting down that rumor, but of course, the basis for shooting down the rumor is coming from a person who might not want to admit that he talked to UCLA to begin with. So we're kind of taking people's word for it to a little bit of an extent. John, was your hand up? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, does the state of Arizona know how to count? I kind of say it kind of seriously because this is now two different times where Arizona College has now made a massive miscalculation on money. I'm really curious if they know how to count in Arizona at this point.
I'm not gonna touch that one only because with Arizona State, that's a joke that has been overplayed. Gosh, one other topic I wanted to also mention, only because again, it happened. I'm looking at the date on this 6 days ago. So again, right after we did the last show, is Nicholas Lou Saban. I always love that's his full name because of obviously Lou Saban being such a great coach in his own right, is going to be a game day analyst, which I'm very curious to see how that works out because the way it's been written out in the initial announcement, alongside host Reese Davis, Lee Corso, Kirk Herbstreit, Desmond Howard, and Pat McAfee at the desk. First of all, that desk is getting really big and really full. I'm not sure there's been, I mean, again, I don't know how legitimate the rumors are, but they were, for someone who wasn't totally a joker, does that mean Pat McAfee's quietly planning to leave? Because it's been kind of hinted he isn't entirely thrilled with the way things are going. Or it could be, are they sort of creating a plan B for Lee Corso? Depending on where he goes. I mean, we obviously wish him long health and life, but we've all seen how he's doing. So we'll see how it goes. But that's still going to be, at least if they're all planning the way they are now, that's going to be a pretty full desk. So I'm excited to see. I think he'll be an interesting commentator. I've heard him talk a little bit. I mean, anyone who's seen games where the Crimson Tide aren't in the championship game, he's oftentimes brought in to at least comment on it a little bit. I'm curious to see how it goes. For example, as it's been pointed out, Urban Meyer on the Fox show, like I end up not watching it live as much, but I'll sometimes go to YouTube and watch his play breakdowns on, if you ever watch those clips, he's really good at it and really enjoyable. Like I love it. I always tell people if you ever go to a media day or like a conference media day where you talk to like the head coaches of all these schools, the first thing that strikes you, if you haven't really done it, is when you actually sit down and talk to all these coaches, you usually pretty quickly go, oh, I get it. I get how you get all these young, talented guys to come play for you. Because I'm listening to you, man. I'm hyped up. So again, like it's fun to see him draw plays. In fact, I wish they would do that a little bit more. And maybe if they can get Saban to start doing that, oh my gosh, that would be exciting. I'd be looking forward to that. John, your hand's up.
Yeah. Hey, just one more Pac-12 related question. With regards to Washington State and Oregon State, do we think there's a better possibility of them becoming a more permanent member of the Mountain West, or do we actually think someone does pick them up in the long term?
I was leaning towards the latter. I thought they were basically spent and understandably trying to milk what's left of the Pac-2 up until the point where they can't get enough out of it and then join the Mountain West. That was my assumption. However, There is an outside chance because it sounds like they're being a little disruptive, which I don't blame them in the CFP meetings because they still get a vote. They still get a full vote, and all of the CFP meetings have to be unanimous. So, or at least some of their main decisions have to be unanimous. So they could be a stumbling block to the point where we'll see how they leverage it. There is an outside chance that they try to leverage it too much, and the result is you get some very angry programs that recreate a 2026 onward playoff that is not through the CFP, and that would potentially be to their detriment. But I don't blame what they're doing. I don't think anyone will be that vindictive. I think they're trying their hardest. As I've said before, the priority is their Oregon State and Wazoo are still trying to get into a P4 conference. I think if they feel they've exhausted everything and they've exhausted whatever financial benefit the pack gives them as just a two team conference, then they'll probably move to the next level. But obviously they're going to have a scheduling arrangement with the Mountain West, but I think they're going to prolong it as long as possible. And formal move as a merger or a combination until they decide that they financially can't continue not being part of another conference unless they can get into that the P4. Speaking of the college football playoff, another thing I should mention, and I know this is reported today as well, it looks like ESPN and the college football playoff are in agreement on a new contract for this 12-team playoff. So it increases the payout a decent amount. I mean, it's going from it's a 6-year extension worth $1.3 billion per year. Previously, the semifinals were giving a payout of $608 million per year. So for those 3 games that comprise the old playoff, plus the other 4 New Year's Six bowls. So this will add 1.3. I know there was a little bit of wiggle room on all of this. It was a little bit of negotiation because I was reading a quote that said some of the TV people were like, look, there's going to be a first round playoff game that could end up being like Liberty at Cincinnati. And, they're like, the value of that for a TV audience is not going to be the same. So you kind of see why it's still an incredible amount of money. Let's be clear. So, but that was kind of the average sort of lowers a little bit. The current contract's average fails to include the pricing for on-campus first round games. So it looks like, again, they're taking that into account as they negotiated. So there's a lot of money on the table now, which it's going to be interesting too. The only reason I mentioned that deal is because this is, again, an outside chance. But when they announced the Big Ten SEC strategic partnership, there was a thought that with the playoff technically only agreed to between the conferences and the CFP, it only runs until not the 2024 season, but the 2025 season next year. Then technically we don't have a playoff agreement for the seasons after that. There was a thought that if if the SEC and Big Ten are not thrilled with it, they may then in 2026 create an alternative playoff situation where they would probably invite all the other conferences again, but it would be on terms that maybe they like more, maybe more at-large bids, which would benefit their conference. Theoretically in that scenario. But by locking down this TV deal with ESPN, the CFP may have strategically positioned themselves in a way that would potentially kind of push those two mega conferences to still play ball with the CFB as it is now. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the CFP is run now because, of course, we're getting the I forgot his name, the Air Force Academy general. I met him actually at on the sideline of the championship, and it's really obviously he's a military guy, so you know what it's like. You talk to a general, their lives are together. You talk to them, and you can tell like, all right, you know exactly what your plan is. But I'm very curious to see what it's going to be like to see the CFP run by someone with that kind of experience. Let's see here. Another interesting fact is now obviously the Super Bowl is done. We're heading towards the NFL draft. I always consider that the graduation ceremony for a lot of college football. To me, that's kind of the end of the season. I saw, again, one of the interesting quotes is only 79% of the quarterbacks invited to the draft combine, which is going to be in Indy this year, were transfers. So that's interesting because, again, the 321 players get invited to the NFL combine. people with promising talent who are probably going to be drafted. 35% of them were transfers at some point in their college careers, but among that group, the leaders are the quarterbacks with a 79% transfer rating for all of those. And that was Max Olson at the Athletic. He threw those numbers out there. Um, Excuse me. Let's hear, John. I see your hand up, and then we can get to you, College Football Lounge.
Yeah, hey, I just want to say shout out to Virginia State getting a guy to the combine this year. That's big for them. Just big for them, their conference. I say, just want to give a quick shout out.
Absolutely, yeah. And HBCU, and I believe aren't they D2? I always forget. I know they're like they've got a really cool logo because it looks like
I think
yeah, they're D2.
They're
D2
D2.
for
Yeah,
sure.
it's hard to remember.
That's not an easy thing to do to get, because again, 321 spots. I think Michigan's got like 18 players that were invited. I mean, this is all going back to Harbaugh saying he thinks he's going to have the most players ever. He's going to challenge for the record of players drafted, and it made sense even when he said it earlier on, only because so many of this team, and part of the reason why. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but part of the reason why it was expected for him to depart, no matter how Michigan did the season, was because he had built a team that was maturing completely at this season. So this was it, the make or break season for that talent. And then they were all going to be departing all at once for the most part. So yeah, that makes sense why they'd be flooding the draft right now. So College Football Lounge, you've been super patient.
Yeah, since you were touching on the draft and the NFL, one thing I've been thinking a lot about recently is, the number of players in the NFL we've seen over the years who, have been superstars who played at either small FBS schools or not even at the FBS level. And in the transfer portal era, that's just not going to be a thing anymore. They may start there, they're not going to finish there. And an example I would give is Jordan Love, who really caught fire at the end of the year, was playing really well in the playoffs, played his entire college career at Utah State. I mean, that's just not something that's going to happen. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it is a thing. It's going to be fundamentally different moving forward unless there's some dramatic change in course, which I don't foresee. So that's going to be something that is interesting to watch moving forward.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Yeah, I think we've entered an interesting zone where even some of the P4 teams are going to be kind of feeding each other. Although it might go in different directions. I mean, obviously, we also see some of the players from these top teams realize maybe they're not getting the touches, or they're not in the depth chart, and then they get a chance to hop over to another program and perhaps do just enough there to get that NFL interest. So I'm curious to see how this evolves with time. But although I agree, the FCS and G5 programs are the ones that are not benefiting the most out of this, for sure. Although, for example, Caden Salter, the quarterback at Liberty, he was an interesting one because he went there from Auburn, as I believe, and he put his name into the portal and then stayed. So obviously, maybe they threw some money his way, or maybe it wasn't quite the interest he was hoping for. But there'll be a little bit of things like that. But certainly with a lot of these players, NIL and the portal have changed that a little bit, and certain things have definitely turned out differently. I've heard this commented by several groups. I'm surprised how much I enjoyed Dan Wetzel's takes. I used to absolutely not be a fan of him, and maybe it's personal because he was the spearhead on the Reggie Bush stuff back in back in 2006 and 7 and stuff like that. But the thing is, he pointed out, like, we're all the biggest fear is we're going to go back to the old times. Like, and I say the old times, like before scholarship limits, where you get Alabama under Bear Bryant or all these teams just stacking up players and all the best talent. And there was that brief period of time where it genuinely looked like Texas A&M was doing that. And then it turns out, you could do that. And then everyone wants to leave because they're not getting the touches they thought they were going to get. And they can't quite succeed as planned. It kind of reminds me, there was a post on RCFB that I thought was kind of fun one. FBS schools who have the least living former coaches, so the least amount of coaches who had been their head coach who are no longer alive. And it was pointed out Penn State only has one, and it's the new head coach at Boston College, Bill O'Brien. because obviously Joe Pa was there for forever and a day, and then he passes away. Bill O'Brien was brought in to kind of fix things. He was there for a couple of years before he went to the NFL. And then they've been James Franklin ever since. So that one's kind of striking. Obviously, you got Iowa, which has been the Kirk Ferentz show forever. But the funniest one, again, I love it. This A&M fan, I love him. His name is Turkish guy. He's been on our CFB forever. But we have 7 former living head coaches, and he went through the whole line: Jimbo Fisher, Kevin Sumlin, Mike Sherman, Dennis Franchione, R.C. Slocum, Jackie Sherrill, Gene Stallings, all former head coaches of Texas A&M, all alive. And you could even throw in some of the others who were interim head coaches at A&M. That was a stunning number. That is, and of course, a Florida State fan jumped in and said, like, does this count if the coach is still physically alive but dead to the fan base? And again, there you get a little bit of that Willie Fritz love coming from those folks over at FSU. Another kind of amusing comment. I don't know how this guy thought this, but again, another fan, an Ohio State fan, Jay Derulu. I don't know how to say it, but he said, I just realized after 14 years that Chip Kelly and Brian Kelly are not brothers or related at all. I don't know how you could think that. Like, just because the guy's last name is Kelly, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, you might be from Ireland. I don't even know about that one. It's like Smith, I'll be honest. There's one coach who honestly I was shocked to realize he wasn't related to another head coach, and that is Alabama State's Eddie Robinson Jr. Because Eddie Robinson Sr., in my mind, is of course the legendary Grambling head coach who at one point had the most wins in college football. And his son is actually called Eddie Robinson Jr. I've met him because each year in the national championship week they'll do the Eddie Robinson Award, which is a coach's award. And like I was there when they handed it to Ed Orgeron, and Eddie Robinson's son is there, and he's Eddie Robinson Jr. But the head coach of Alabama State's a different Eddie Robinson Jr., and that kind of adds to the confusion of that. And that's one of my, because I remember when I was trying to figure it out, because I was helping. One of the things I do is I was hired to do a show for another media group, and I was asked to help look up fathers and sons. We did a show on fathers and sons head coaches, and I was actually looking up Eddie Robinson, and I'm like, why doesn't it mention his son was a head coach at Alabama State? And I was reading the Eddie Robinson Jr. Like, why doesn't it mention his dad was Eddie Robinson? And finally, I found that article that said, like, no, they're not related. And that one makes more sense to me than Chip and Brian Kelly. I'll tell you that much. And it was interesting too, kind of making that list about what were coaching dynasties, because there's so many of them. And I thought the lead for in college football, I don't think it's pretty easy to argue that one of the most just college football coaches right now, I think the Harbaughs may be in the lead, because you got Jack Harbaugh, who won a championship and FCS program, which is now FBS Western Kentucky. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh just won his championship at Michigan. I mean, we can even give a bonus for his brother being a Super Bowl champion with the Ravens. And then his son, Jay, is also a college coach. That's a striking thing. There's very few people, because we went through everyone. I mean, Pete Carroll, obviously his son Brennan, is now the Washington Huskies offensive coordinator, along with obviously Bill Belichick's son Steven is now going to be the defensive coordinator at Washington. Bobby Bowden's probably the other one I want to mention, just in terms of coaching trees, because the late Bobby Bowden, obviously a legend in his own right. And then you had Tommy Bowden, who, he's probably now better known as the guy who preceded Dabo at Clemson, but he wasn't bad at Clemson. And he had an undefeated season at Tulane with Rich Rod as his offensive coordinator. That's a really funny one. I don't know if you guys ever talked about that, but Rich Rod, people were upset that he did not get to succeed Bowden at Tulane. That's still one of those touchy subjects. And then he eventually ended up becoming obviously the head coach of West Virginia, where he did really well. Pissed them all off by leaving for Michigan, and pissed off everyone at Michigan, and has now obviously ended up at Arizona, and is now currently a successful coach again at Jacksonville State, which got obviously its first full FBS season and managed to even back its way into a bowl this season. Another one we wanted to mention, of course, Tommy Bowden, Terry Bowden, and Jeff Bowden. So just kind of an interesting kind of story there. And then one other family that kind of came up in all of this is you can't go can't avoid the brother Stoops because the amount of success in that family. Ron Stoops Sr. was the dad, and he was studied, I guess, education at Youngstown State and was a high school coach at Cardinal Mooney out in Youngstown. But then his sons all became coaches. Ron Stoops, the oldest, Ron Stoops Jr., followed in his dad's footsteps, actually. He went to Youngstown State, studied education, and was a high school and college assistant his whole career. He's still alive, obviously. Bob Stoops, we all know who he is, Oklahoma head coach. He retired when he did only because Ron Stoops, I mean, he did not live long. I mean, he said it when he retired. It's like, my dad died of a heart attack. When he was like, oh gosh, it was like 50 something, 52 years old. So that's why Bob Stoops retired when he did. And he ended up being a decent player. Obviously, he and his two brothers, Mike and Mark, also went to play for Iowa, and all three of them became head coaches at one point or another. Obviously, Mike Stoops is no longer head coach, but he was the head coach of Arizona, and Mark is obviously the head coach of Kentucky. So it's kind of fascinating stuff. The bonus with that family is only because around the same time in these same kind of high school classes were the Pelini brothers, Carl and Bo. Carl played for Columbia and obviously was the FAU head coach for a little while. And then Bo obviously was Nebraska and Youngstown State. And he was a good player. He actually got recruited by Ohio State to play there back in the day. So that was kind of a fun kind of conversation that we put together and kind of these relationships that kind of popped ahead when I was reading this gentleman who did not know that those two were not related. Oh my goodness. Well, you know what? I am going to slowly wrap this up. It's been not quite an hour, but I think we've hit so many topics tonight. And I think oh, John, your hand's up. No, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I just want to ask, you enjoyed the game this past Sunday? Any thoughts, feelings? You enjoy after?
I am a weird. I'm like, I joke. There's like me and 10 other people where we're like crazy college football fans, and we're not like super passionate NFL fans. So I was familiar with the game. I was actually tutoring my kids for most of the game. It was interesting to see. I caught overtime, and that was great just to see finally the NFL embrace a sane overtime system. Um, I'm glad that I'm glad that, for how big of an audience that got, because that blew the roof off of a televised event. I think 120 million people
Yeah,
watched it at one point or another.
it's
That it
like
went to, it wasn't a blowout. That's like the best thing that can happen for the sport because yeah, all the comments have been made about, oh, Taylor Swift, people watch him because of that. Well, fine. I'm sure I'm not saying a majority of them, but there's going to be a group of people that might not have never watched a football game who watched that and went like, that was amazing. That was an incredible ending. And maybe they'll be the ones, again, I'm not saying it's going to be like a majority of them, but I mean, a few more people, a few more, get more people into the sport. It never hurts. College Football Lounge, what's up?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I pretty much was just like you in that I went through a pretty long period of time where I barely watched the NFL at all. I watched it a lot as a kid. I was a huge Dolphins fan. I'm aging myself here, but Marino in the 80s, early 90s. Um, and then I went through a period of time in the 2000s, 2010s where I barely even watched it at all. And now I have two tween daughters and a wife who want to watch every single Chiefs game. Uh, so I have, also watched every single Chiefs game. So I think I've watched more NFL this season than I had in quite some time.
That is so amazing. It's cute though, isn't it great? Like if you can get your kids to watch something that you're into, I mean that's the best part. My kids are a little too young right now, and they're boys, so they're really that's not really a selling point for them. But yeah, no, I mean it's so funny too. I'm always like, do I want to get them into dad's college football team? Like I don't want to have them like feel like senses of value and like the things I feel after a game. But no, I love that. That's great. That's wonderful that happened. I wonder. I imagine what that experience has been surprisingly the representative of. I think a lot of folks, which brought them into it. But that's a sweet story. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah. I was gonna say, man, I know people are critical or people are saying they're tired of seeing it. But I mean, I think, if anything, it brought a lot of people who never really considered watching football into the sport of football, which, I always say it's never a bad thing. Whatever got them in there in the first place, and then with football keeps them around, I say I'm all for it. I think more football fans is not a bad thing in this
Yeah,
city.
and I think the NFL is also doing something which I do like, which is their international outreach. I know it isn't always great for the fans who are finding out. Like, I mean, they announced that game; it's going to be in Madrid. That's going to be exciting. And they've got a game I think in Brazil that's coming up. And there's huge fan bases in those countries, not like a majority of the population, but enough to legitimize it. But I did watch some of like I go and read the. I don't necessarily wait for the commercials. I go and see the ratings of the commercials, and then I watch them that are the ones that are rated really high, and that NFL international one that was set in Accra in Ghana. That was an excellent commercial. That was like I love when they do that stuff like that because that's I've always said I'm a huge fan of international college football, which is also a thing too to kind of encourage that development, which would also develop pro leagues. And each there are a lot of pro leagues in other countries that are nowhere even remotely close to the talent, obviously in the NFL. But some of them allow import players, so you'll sometimes see random guys who you may remember from college football who end up in Japan or Europe playing in these kind of very amateur leagues. But it's kind of amusing. So any more to get people interested in the sport, I think it's wonderful. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. It's actually coming up on about an hour. This was our CFB Talk 181. We do these Tuesday night. We'd like to hear from you. I'm Bob Ekhayeri. It's always great talking to you. Thank you, John, and College Football Lounge. It was great having you as part of this conversation. I'll go ahead and sign off. Thanks again. Now I'm hang up and listen.